What's up guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make sure your beat mixes sound good everywhere. Welcome back to another video guys. Now first of all, I want to apologize because my upload schedule for this month has been just completely out of whack. Usually I upload Mondays and Thursdays, but the month of March has just been insane. Anyway, for the past couple weeks, we've been talking about beat mixing and preparation, and in the first video that I put out in this little mini-series, we talked about the truth behind beat mixing and mastering, and in the last video, I showed you guys how I personally prepare and export my beats to upload to the internet to potentially sell online. Now, today's video topic I was going to add to that last video, but it was getting a little bit long, so I decided to cut it off. Nonetheless, we're talking about it today. All right, so raise your hand if you've ever been in the studio making a beat. You mix it, it sounds great, and then you take it out to like your car, or maybe you listen to it on your laptop, maybe on some headphones, and it sounds like crap. Or one of my personal favorites, whenever you are going back to your beat catalog and you're listening, you're playing back after some time, and you realize that not all your beats are the same volume. You start playing and the first one's like just right, and then the next one's just a little bit louder than that, and the next one is like way below that. Now I'm raising my hand because personally I've been subject to both of those things, but that is exactly what we're talking about today. Now there are many reasons why these things happen, but one of the bigger ones especially for us home producers and home engineers, is that we are working out of rooms that are not meant to have music recorded or mixed in. And as much as we try to optimize our rooms by adding, absorption panels and doing all kinds of things, these will always be obstacles that we will have to overcome. Now, as much as I'd love to say just use your ears, sometimes we need the help from certain things like plugins and graphs to make sure that we're headed in the right direction, and that is what I'm going to show you guys today. All right, now real quick before we get started, quick disclaimer. I feel like I do this in almost all my videos, but I think it's important. Now, a lot of the stuff that I teach you guys is not absolute. It's not end all be all. These are things that I've learned throughout the years, that I've discovered or adopted, that get me to the results that I want and that I want to share with you guys. Now, in the beginning, I didn't have anybody to kind of show me the ropes, so it's just cool for me to now be able to pass that knowledge on to you guys. But ultimately, what I encourage you guys to do every single time that you guys watch my tutorials or whatever the case might be, take that knowledge, but experiment. Take the foundations, the basics, but at the end of the day, you are your own producer, you are your own engineer, so experiment and try things until you get to the results that you want. All right, so now we're in Studio One, and this is the mixing session for the last beat that I put out on my Beat Making Mondays series. You guys can check that out. This one was called Drop Top, and it was a Migos type beat. But we're gonna go over to our mixer real quick. And now, if you guys remember in that last video that I put out for this series, I told you guys that I do not add anything to my master bus. I leave that clean. I put everything on my mix bus. Now on my mix bus is where I actually add my mastering chain, and I showed you guys the two limiters that I use to get the results that I want. But if you had a bit of an eagle eye, you noticed that there were 3 plugins under my limiters that I did not talk about. All right, so if we take a look at those, we have 1, 2, and 3 here. Now, technically, these 3 plugins can go on the master bus because they don't affect the sound. They're merely just for analytical purposes. They give us numbers and graphs for us to kind of, evaluate and analyze. And usually I would do that because I like to see them separate. But for the sake of this video, I'm going to leave them here on the mix bus because if I add them to the master, it would actually affect my voice here with the video, so we don't want that. All right, so let's take a look at the first plugin here, and this is going to be the T-Rax CS Metering. Now, this one here is from a company called IK Multimedia. They make fantastic plugins, VSTs, mixing plugins, and some hardware. Now, I don't remember if I got this from a bundle, or maybe I purchased it and didn't realize I had it, but I've been using it for about 1.5 years, and it's literally one of my favorite plugins for mixing ever. So let's take a look at the plugin real quick. The first thing that you notice is that we have a bit of a peak meter for both the left and the right channel. At the bottom, we have an RMS reading in case that's something that you're interested in. But the one feature that I absolutely love about this plugin is this middle bar here called Perceived Loudness. Now, we talked briefly about what perceived loudness was in my How to Make Your Drums Hit Harder video. Now, if you guys remember from that video, peak level and perceived loudness are not the same thing. Peak level will literally be just how loud your mix is, and perceived loudness is how loud our brain thinks the mix is. Now, in that video, we briefly talked about some of the things that can help with perceived loudness, especially when it comes to drums, and those things being, distortion, saturation, harmonic content. So if you want to learn more about that, definitely go check that video out. But all right, back to the plugin. Now this perceived loudness feature here, what I love about it is that you can set what kind of genre you're working with. So if you go to settings here and you go to loudness suggestion, you can kind of choose between the different genres that they have. Now, personally, I work a lot with hip hop and rap, so I leave it there. Sometimes I do some pop, R&B, soul, but take a look at the green meter here. Whenever I change the genre, you're gonna see those change. So let me go over to like jazz. So that changes a lot. So usually, like I said, I leave this in the hip hop and rap genre here, and as you can see, you want to stay between the green here. Now you can go a little bit below. Usually my mixes are about -20 to -14. That is a good range to be in, but essentially the gist of it is that if you're able to export your beats between -20 and -14 on this perceived loudness scale, then essentially your beats will all be on average the same volume whenever you upload to the internet. Now this is important because if you have a customer who's an artist who's listening to your beats, you want to make sure that all those are consistent. You don't want to have, like we discussed before, where one is super loud, one is super low. You want to make sure they're all on average about the same volume, and this helps a lot. Now last but not least, of course, we have a little bit of a phase detection meter here, so you can see where your mix lands, and you have a bit of a spectrum, so if you want to analyze specific bands, you can do that as well. All right, moving on down to the next plugin, we have another Ozone 6. Now this one, as opposed to the one that I use in my mastering chain, has almost nothing activated. So if you can see here, the only thing that I have is a compressor plugin, but the compressor is not even activated. The only reason that I use this plugin is because it allows me to isolate the different bands in my beat. Now you can do this with other plugins, like I think the Fab Filter EQ also allows you to isolate the bands, but essentially what I do is I use this plugin. Let me pin it up top here so it doesn't move. I use it in conjunction with this other plugin. This one here is called Scope or Shope. I really don't know how to pronounce that, but essentially this allows me to isolate the bands for my mix, and this allows me to see the waveform of anything really. So if I'm isolating, let's say the highs, I can see the waveform for the highs, and I could even freeze it to see where it's peaking. Now I've kind of set different parameters throughout the years, and pretty much if I'm able to keep every band within my set parameters, my mix usually sounds good in the outside world. So let me show you guys what I mean. I'll play the beat first so you guys can see the difference. Let me start from the hook, and we'll go ahead and play that. So this shows you the entire waveform of the entire beat. But what I do is let's start with the highs. I isolate the highs, and now if I play it, it only gives me the waveform for the highs on my beat, and I can actually freeze it and see, kind of analyze my beat that way. All right, so let's go through each band, and I'm gonna show you guys my parameters that I use to make sure my beat mixes stay in check. Okay, so the first thing I want you guys to notice is where I have my bands placed. Now, the highs, I have them between 10K and above. The high mids between 2K and 10K. The low mids between like 119, 120 to 2K, and then the sub frequencies below that. So now what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and isolate the highs first, and we'll play that and see where it's peaking. All right, now this here is going to be a combination of the hi-hat and like the snare crack. And usually what I like to do is I like to keep this here below -12 dB. Now if you take a look from where it says negative infinity to the top, we have -12, and below that we have -12. So usually you want to keep the waveform in here for this frequency. The reason for this is that high frequencies are very tricky because they can, one, be really annoying if you don't keep them in check. One of my biggest pet peeves is whenever I'm listening to a track and the snare or like the hi-hat are super piercy to the point where it's like annoying. But two, and most importantly, if you don't keep your high frequencies in check, you can like hurt your hearing, you can damage your hearing, and potentially whoever else might be listening to your beats. All right, moving on to the next band, we have the high mids. Let's listen to that. Okay, now if you take a look here, predominantly we are going to have some hi-hats, but this here is going to be the highest peak. This is going to be your snare. Now my snares, I like to keep within or below -6 dB. This is the other band that's really, really important because this is going to determine how piercy your snare is. I like to keep it within the -6 dB range, as I said. As you can see, this is well below. This is like -9, but you keep that in check and your snare is always going to sound good. Moving on, let's go over to the low mids. Now this is going to be predominantly your kick. Let's go ahead and listen. So we have a little bit of sub, but this here, the biggest peak is going to be the kick. I like to keep this within -3 dB. Now, if these frequencies go a little bit over, don't freak, unless they're annoying for you, you know, then fix them. But if it sounds good and if it goes a little bit over, no worries. But that right there is my kick, and that is where I like to keep it. And then last but not least, we have the sub bass. Now this one's a little bit subjective, you know, depending on how loud, how, you know, big you want your sub basses and 808s to sound. But take a look at what mine looks like. So if you take a look at the highest peak, we're average about -3, and it kind of just dies down. Now for this beat, the sub frequencies in this band were a little excessive. I normally don't keep them that loud, but you know, this being a Migos trap, kind of Atlanta trap beat, I wanted to have those 808s prominent, and it sounded good, so I left it. But if you want to tame your 808s, you can always add like a compressor to keep them, you know, more consistent, and maybe have them within the -6 range. And guys, that's it. Those are the 3 plugins that I use at the end of every beat to make sure my mixes stay in check. Now again, these are my preferences to make sure my beat mixes sound the way that I want them to, but the goal of this video is for you guys to kind of take the initiative to go that extra mile, to use, you know, extra resources if you have them and you can use them, to make sure your mixes always stay in check, because as much as we want to, sometimes our ears, they might fail us, so we need some extra help. And last but not least, please, 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 I urge you to check your mixes on every platform that you possibly can. Whenever I finish a beat here and I listen to it on my big speakers, then I listen to it on my little mono crap speaker, then I listen to it on my laptop, on, you know, Apple headphones, on these headphones, in my car, and then I even reference other tracks to make sure that it sounds good. Now, you're not going to get a fantastic mix on every platform, simply because, you know, every platform, every device is kind of tuned a little bit differently, but the goal is to get a good balance, to get a great mix, a decent mix on the majority of the platforms. Anyway, that's it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully this video was helpful. If it was, give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you're not already, but I will see you guys on the next one.